Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's the France 24 debate. We're speaking as a big French delegation where we've got the Prime Minister, the Foreign Minister, the Defense Minister, the Economy Minister, all in Saudi Arabia to pen deals. But it's also coming, it's not just about the money, it's also about the changing landscape in the Middle East. And it seems to change every week with the news we have. With us to talk about it and about how to handle Saudi Arabia, he's a former political analyst at the Saudi Embassy in Washington. Fahad Nazer is back with us from Washington. He's with defense consultants JTG. Many thanks for being back with us. Thanks as well to French Senator Nathalie Goulet, who chairs the France Gulf Cooperation Council group in the French Senate. Myriam Benrad, research associate at the French Political Science Institute, Sciences Po, and Didier Chaudet of, say it again in English for me.
Center for the Analysis of Foreign Policy.
Center for the Analysis of Foreign Policy, CAPE in French?
CAP.
CAP in French. There you go. Before the break, Myriam Benrad saying that right now there is no Middle East policy. There's what you have is a fragmented look at every single country that goes à la carte. Of course, the big issue right now is Syria. What with the Russian intervention, Europe preoccupied with ISIS establishing a major foothold. Also, that the refugees that are now beginning to come Europe's way. The fact that there is no game plan, instead a ratcheting up of the tension. However, and this brings us back to Saudi Arabia, is something afoot. The Saudi Deputy Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman meeting Vladimir Putin. It happened this past Sunday in the Russian resort of Sochi. The Deputy Crown Prince, who also happens to be the defense minister, discussing Syria, as did respective foreign ministers.
We stated to the Deputy Crown Prince that we are prepared. We stated our readiness to maximize cooperation between our military and the representatives of our special forces. We want to dispel any doubts that the Russian Air Force is not targeting the Islamic State group, Jabhat al-Nusra, and other terrorist groups.
We stressed again the position of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, which is for Bashar al-Assad's abdication and the continued support for moderate opposition forces. But our main aim with Russia is to find ways to renew our joint activities and to find common ground for the implementation of the first Geneva communique.
Fahad Nazer, tell us, read for us between the diplomatic ease there that we just heard. Why did those two top ministers go to Sochi?
Well, the Saudi government has expressed its concerns very publicly about Russia's recent escalation. They've characterized it as a dangerous escalation. It clearly has the potential to tip the scales in Assad's favor. I think it's, from what I've seen from news reports, I don't think that the Saudis and Russians were able to agree on much. They both seem to have very firm positions. Putin and Russia have seemed to be committed to allowing Assad to stay. Saudi Arabia has invested tremendous political capital in trying to oust Assad over the past 4 years. They're still very committed to supporting the moderate opposition. So I'm not sure where they go from here, but what is clear is that, again, as the U.S. is seen as having disengaged from Syria, I think the Saudis realize that Russia could potentially play an important role in bringing this conflict to an end. However, they do seem to they seem to be on opposite ends at this point, and I'm not sure that there is much room for compromise.
What, so the Saudis think that the Americans are going to pack up and go and stop their air raids and leave the whole campaign to the Russians?
No, I wouldn't say that. But I mean, in terms of Syria, I mean, I think the Saudis have serious questions about the U.S.'s commitment to resolving the Syrian crisis specifically. I think, obviously, the United States and Saudi Arabia are cooperating very closely in targeting ISIS strongholds in Syria, and I think that's very important common ground for them. And I want to make clear here that I think there's a perception among some that Saudi-U.S. relations are really in trouble. I wouldn't go that far. I think that and this applies to France as well, I don't think that any single country can replace what the United States provides to Saudi Arabia and other countries in the region in terms of the security guarantees. The United States has been able to demonstrate its ability to protect its military power in the region. It has done it repeatedly. It has the military infrastructure. It has by far the biggest navy in the world. So I don't think that France, or frankly even a combination of countries, can replace the United States. However, the Saudis have made it very clear that during a time of unprecedented turmoil in the region, they do want to keep their options open, and they do want to strengthen their relations with many countries, not just in the global powers like France and Russia, but even countries in the region. They've spoken with leaders of Turkey, Egypt, further out in Indonesia and Pakistan. So they're speaking to everybody because, again, I think the turmoil in the region is very much unprecedented.
All right,
so they're leaving all their options open.
Speaking to everybody, but Russia, Didier Chaudet, is not everybody. Russia is now a major player in propping up Bashar al-Assad. How do you explain this visit? Is there some kind of a political solution or something that's up?
Saudi Arabia understands that if they want to have any kind of win in Syria, they will need to speak to their enemies, not only to their friends. So to speak with the French, to speak with the Americans, it's fine. But you have people who are on the other side, the Iranians, the Russians, way behind, but still looking at what is going on over there. The Chinese, 300 Chinese nationals are fighting on the side of Daesh. Beijing is very worried about that. They do know that at the end of the day, they will need to talk to them, and they try to use the stick, but also to use some monetary help. If I may say so, you have to remember that in July this year, Russia was offered no less than 10 billion, exactly like us. A few hours ago. So basically, the Saudis are using their money not only to help their friends, but also to talk to their enemies. And right now, Russia is, from their point of view, an enemy because it is supporting the Iranians. The big issue here is the Saudi Arabia-Iran tension.
The big issue, the Saudi Arabia-Iran tension. But even there, it's clear as mud. We saw in French newspaper Le Figaro last month this report about the top Syrian intelligence chief, General Ali Mamlouk, first going to Egypt and then going to Riyadh. So there are these channels that are open all the while.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot that we don't see, that is not very public. And at the same time, I would add to what was said that everybody's playing and everybody's lying in this story. Unfortunately, at the expense of both Syrian and Iraqi peoples. And I'd like to insist on this because the truth is that nobody is really now playing towards the resolution of these conflicts. Now we are in a context of very tense, brutal rivalries, proxy wars that have been waged on both territories for now a long time, including by the Saudis, let's be very frank. The question is not to have Manichaean binary approaches to what's going on. We have two countries that are being partitioned, fragmented, including by these proxy wars that have amplified the conflictuality and not solved it at all. And it's a lie to say that the solution will come from neighboring states. I do not believe in this. I think that Russia entering the game will further fragment Syria and Iraq, that we are witnessing a partitioning of those countries, and we are witnessing hegemonic, if not imperial, wars in this story, coming from the neighboring states and now coming from the grand bargain between the United States and the Russians. But this is all at the expense of Syrians and Iraqis. Let's put it, because if we're talking about sovereignty, I think sovereignty of both Iraq and Syria have been violated for a long time. We can discuss the question of Assad and any form of a transition. and of course, there's no agreement between these players. But the real question is, and I'm referring here to a piece I wrote for Libération, the French newspaper, a few days ago, the great absent in this story are the Syrians and the Iraqis, which have become, at least for the civilians, like animals being bombed by everybody, with no end, in sight, with no horizon, and with these countries, these players, basically waging their own wars on their territories and at their expense. And this is very important to say this, because I believe personally that the solution can only come from the Syrians and the Iraqis. And the more there is interference...
But Myriam, we've seen when we have, for instance, we had these conferences in Geneva, we've tried to have various peace conferences. It's incredibly difficult to get people that are representative of the Syrians and the Iraqis. How do you do that?
I will add one thing.
Who is legitimate to speak on behalf of the Syrians?
And this is the real question. Yeah. Who's legitimate today? The real question is that the Syrians and the Iraqis don't agree between themselves. And you add to this the fact that neighboring states, and now Russia and also the United States in some way, think they have a right to judge the future of these peoples. And I'd like to reaffirm a principle here, which is very important in my view, and which is totally ignored in all of this story, which is the right of peoples to decide their future. And at the moment, the Syrians and the Iraqis are escaping massively because they have no future. And because what we're witnessing again is the great return of imperialism in the region, coming from neighboring states, coming from the Russians, who think they can solve anything, and let's see if Putin's strategy will solve anything. I don't think so. Just the same way I don't think the United States or the Saudis or the Iranians can solve anything. I think the Syrians and the Iraqis should be much more consulted on what their future will be.
Nathalie Goulet?
Very challenging to share the floor with Myriam Benrad. But we were talking about Russia. Russia has always support Syria. And if you don't support your friend during the bad time, you lose the confidence of your partner. So Russia has to be here. But I think that somebody is missing despite the lack of vision and everything. It's international community, because all this mess come also because the United Nations and the Security Council was absolutely unable to solve the problem. So if we are talking about law, about legality of airstrikes and everything, we are totally wrong. I mean, so I share totally what Myriam Benrad said. But coming back to France, I think that France by herself is not able to do anything, especially we do not have any political solution to replace Bashar or to solve the problem. So right now, it's like a big Rubik's Cube. You know, everybody is playing his own game, hoping that something will happen, and we do not have any global strategy.
All right, but who can instigate that? Who's what is the party in all of this? And you've mentioned a lot of them that can get everybody around.
Yeah, but at the same time,
who should be doing that? Whose job is that?
Normally, we have the Security Council and we have international community and we have a United Nations. Normally they have been created for this purpose, except that we don't respect the charter. Nobody does. So, you know, now we have to try to fix the situation and try to have a legal vision also, because we are not in the international legality right now. It's totally, since 2003 anyway, the situation is totally screwed up from United Nations as a...
That's the main point. You said really the main point. Since 2003,
yes.
Since the war on Iraq.
Yeah.
So I think that Mrs. Benrad also said the most important thing in a nutshell, so no need to come back on it. But at the end of the day, if we need to point fingers here, when you have the greatest power of all, who decide that a state and its leader is not good enough and invade it and destroys it, and goes away after we have a mess. And the mess began in Iraq and now has been coming to Syria. France try to make business out of it.
France did the same thing in Libya, by the way.
Exactly. That's why now, as a French, I have really a problem.
International mandate.
At the end of the day, it's true that we destroyed a country the way the Americans destroyed one, and you have a mess over there. And like the Americans, we don't talk about it enough. We need to come back to this idea, maybe indeed to listen to the different parts over there. But on that, I will add that unfortunately, I think that the only way to have real peace in this part of the world is to be able to talk with everybody. France could be able to do that if we will come back to this, to the Gaullist way of doing diplomacy, to talk with everybody. Right now we are able to talk with the Saudis, with the Emiratis, and it's good, and they are friends. But why aren't we able to talk more to Damascus? Why aren't we able to talk more to Moscow? Why aren't we able to talk more to Tehran? We should be able to talk with all of them and to bring them together with our European allies.
There's more talking going on than it seems. We just don't quite know what's being said. It brings me back again, and I'll put it to you, Fahad Nazer, this head of Syrian intelligence, General Ali Mamlouk, last month going to Riyadh. How do you read that?
Well, I'm not sure that that actually ever happened. I think that account is disputed by many people. I know that it's been written about, but to be honest, myself included, I don't know that that ever happened. But just going back to a couple of points that some of your guests have made, and I agree, I think that from the Saudi perspective, there's a perception that the international community and the United Nations Security Council specifically has failed the people of Yemen, for instance, and has refused to, there was no inclination to interfere in Yemen to stop the bloodshed over there. And I think that has led Saudi Arabia to change course and to adopt this more assertive foreign policy that in its eyes, it's basically a question of defending its own interests. But again, when we're speaking about Yemen... But
civilians there have been the main victims, it seems.
Well, that, again, I think it's important to keep in mind that violence had been taking place in Yemen way before the Saudis got involved. In fact, the Houthis and the previous president, Ali Abdullah Saleh, fought 6 different wars over the past few years. Now they're allies, but you can Google footage of President Ali Abdullah Saleh accusing the Houthis back in 2006, I believe, of targeting hospitals and schools. So I think the Houthis have a long record of targeting civilian targets and not showing really much concern for the well-being and safety of the people of Yemen. It's also very clear that they thought that they could impose their will by force on the rest of Yemen. They had no interest in sharing power. They thought that, you know, with Iranian backing, that they could just impose their will. And I think that has compelled and forced the Saudis to intervene. And I think the Saudis were fairly
Okay, so Fahad Nazer, let me ask you this. We saw with the recent war of words after that tragic stampede at Mecca between Iran and Saudi Arabia that the relations are not good between between those two powers. How do you get those two players around the same table to really flesh out some kind of a political solution that can tone it down?
Well, I think that Iran can really take a step towards a rapprochement with Saudi Arabia by first stopping this sort of behavior, by not using a tragic incident like the Hajj where 700 people got killed to score political points. I mean, if you look at the American reaction or reaction from any other country, no single country chose to use the Hajj to point fingers or to lay blame or to try to make this argument that you know, the custodianship of the Holy Mosque should be taken away from Saudi Arabia. Only Iran made that argument. I thought it really showed, I think, callous disregard for the tragic event that happened. And really, it just raises questions about how serious are the Iranians in you know, turning a new page with the Saudis. If you, again, use such a tragic incident to score political points as opposed to show solidarity and to offer help the way most other countries did, I think that's one of many examples that just makes the Saudis, I think, have some serious questions about how serious Iran is in turning a new page and trying to reach compromises. I mean, the Iranians, you know, kind of talk a good game, but just their actions always belie their talk.
Nathalie Goulet, how do you get the Saudis and the Iranians around the table?
Well, I think that France precisely may be a good way because we are so friendly with Saudis, and now we get closer to Iranian, I think that it would be a good idea for France to try to get them to a marriage of reason. They don't like one each other. You know, they have to bear one each other, but they don't like them each other. That's for sure. But now maybe France, maybe it would be a good idea to try, and it would be a good perspective and maybe a vision around this Gulf, because whatever it is, it's a Persian Gulf.
Myriam Benrad?
Well, I think, again, it's all about hegemony. Whether you're talking about the Saudis or the Iranians, they all want hegemony. I mean, we are not, in my view, in a process of accommodation or negotiation. I think lives of civilians are being downplayed, if not, looked at with disdain from, by everybody. This is why I'm saying that the bomb, the air campaign that is being led either by the United States or by the Russians or by the different players are not going to solve these issues, including in Yemen. This is also why I say that if we're talking at least about Iraq and Syria, the solution is not going to come either from the Saudis or the Iranians. I'm sorry if I'm disappointing certain people here, but it's not going to happen in my view.
Didier Chaudet, one final question on this. We see, again, that the refugee crisis here in Europe has suddenly put Syria back on the map for European leaders. Mm-hmm. Is that going to help to put pressure on those regional powers to come to the table?
Maybe. What is mind-blowing, again, I live in Asia most of the time, so from far away things seem even more shocking. To have not thought that with all the problems in Syria and Iraq and in Libya, to think that we will not imagine any kind of problem coming back to us out of that is amazing. People are indeed suffering over there. We disregard this suffering in the name of realpolitik. Why not? But after that, you need to pay the price. The price is to take care of the refugees. If you don't want to take care of the refugees, you make sure that they have a home, not a destroyed home. And then for that, I come back to that. Actually, it's true what Mrs. Benrad said. It will not be the main players around these countries who will help to make peace, but they can help to appease the war. Because they are all helping with their weapons, with their rhetoric, with their propaganda to push people at each other's throat. People over there being Christians, Yazidis, Sunni, Shia, they lived together for centuries, and all of a sudden they are killing each other. It's not coming out of the sky, it's not coming from the ground, it's coming a little more from outside the ground. So we need to focus on that, and again, France could help. But unfortunately, I lived in Tehran for some time. I talked with people over there in the different ministries. They have a love for France. They don't trust France very much right now. There is a lot of work to do by the French diplomacy right now to be able to talk with the Iranians again. We are coming closer to them. They don't feel the warmth yet.
All right, we'll finish on those words. I want to thank you, Didier Chaudet, Myriam Benrad, Nathalie Goulet. I want to thank Fahd Nazer for being with us from Washington. Stay with us. Our Media Watch segment is next. And we say hello to James Creedon. James, the outset of our conversation, Senator Goulet, sitting here, said, this is business, when it comes to France going to Saudi Arabia. And if we don't get those 10 billion euros worth of deals, someone else will.
Someone else will, indeed. Well, it hasn't stopped press criticism for, I suppose, keeping the issue of human rights very quiet indeed during the discussion and conclusion of these contracts. Just a quick look at some of that press reaction. Le Temps, the Swiss French language paper, French diplomacy, an obsession with contracts, and indeed it seems that the main objective here was to get past the 10 billion euros worth of defence contracts concluded in September, and to get higher again with these civilian contracts. This obsession with which is Le Temps calls an obsession for shamelessly favouring money over human rights, and they speak about the rattling of coins in quite a negative way. And for Le Nouvel Observateur, the left-leaning weekly in France, they're talking about the indecent cock-a-doodle-doo of France.
The French roosters.
Indeed, right. So I suppose crowing for money, I suppose you could say, and the turning of a blind eye to human rights issues. Why is France bowing before a regime and selling its weapons selling its weapons when the regime disregards human rights and is participating in a war in Yemen? In any case, the response, if you like, to those criticisms is partly included in an article in Le Monde this afternoon, which cites the case of Ali Mohammed al-Nimr, the 21-year-old who could be crucified. He's still, indeed, just simply for demonstrating against the government. Also, the case of the blogger Raif Badawi, who is facing 10 years in prison. So these issues, along with women's rights, all of that, where are they at the current time? Well, Matignon, the Prime Minister's residents, replied saying, when you have trusting relationships, this is the best possibility or backdrop rather to discussing the ensemble of different issues. In other words, these defence contracts and civilian contracts will create a relationship of trust, which will allow one to further elaborate on issues of human rights. That's kind of the argument being put forth by the Prime Minister's office, also by the Foreign Ministry, which has been saying discretion is the key to success. In fact, Laurent Fabius, the Foreign Minister, said when you make big declarations in order to get to be applauded in the press, it is in fact counterproductive. And in talking about the case of Ali Mohammed al-Nimr, he said that this is a long and difficult fight and we will try to save his life. Just to finish with one tweet where some have been saying, well, discretion sometimes when it comes to human rights, but not every time. And the tweet today by Manuel Valls, where he's talking about the 10 million in contracts, is contrasted with a tweet during French military operations last year in Iraq against the Islamic State, where he said, against enemies of freedom, we will fight in the strongest possible manner. So I suppose it depends maybe on the situation, Francois.
All right, James Green, many thanks. The digital footprint is large. We're going to have to leave it there, unfortunately, because we're out of time.
Sorry for the Swiss. They are so careful with the money from the GCC. We are so happy.
Thank you for